Hi, my name is Dave Freeze. I'm a state rep for the 116th district, and Illinois politics never cease to amaze me. Last year, Governor Pritzker pardoned a convicted arsonist, and because of that, that individual was appointed the chief of Prairie du Pont Fire Department. That's in my district. I brought forth a bill 5693 to try and prevent this. What happens in these small communities, as most people know, the local fire departments, it is a really integral part of our community. If you appoint a convicted arsonist, obviously you are going to lose that faith and trust in that community. And as a great example of that, this volunteer fire department had 13 individuals on it. Following this appointment, 10 or 11 of those individuals immediately resigned. It's very unfortunate. Cannot understand why our governor would do this. It's very, very unfortunate. Although the hiring is obviously left up to the mayor or the fire department, this really needs to be brought to the attention of the public. If anybody is convicted of arson, this individual specifically, he burnt down a house and attempted to burn down the high school there in his community. Our citizens have a right to know who is going to be appointed their fire chief, and I hope that this bill gets through, and this provides needed information for our community so they know who's going to be their fire chief. Thanks. Mark?
Thanks, Dave. My name is Mark Luft. I'm state representative for the 91st District. When does the damage to our public safety stop? How much more can they take? How much more can the communities take? First, I want to commend Representative Freeze for bringing this bill forward. Much needed and a great job on this bill, Representative. As Representative Freeze said about this pardon, Pritzker's pardon is a slap in the face to all the hardworking, honest firefighters throughout our state who put themselves in harm's way every day. As a mayor and state representative, I work very hard to ensure that our public safety in our communities and the state continue to raise the bar and provide what the communities ask for and what is much needed there. And I can absolutely sympathize with the majority of the Prairie du Pont Fire Department firefighters who resigned on the spot when Jeremy Simmons became their chief. Things like this cannot happen. They need to be more transparent. The way this pardon was done looks bad as well. Pardon happened, and immediately there was an appointment to fire chief. That's very disturbing. That shows a pattern that cannot be acceptable in a municipality or with the state. I stand behind the patch. Patch means something to these firefighters. It means something to you. It means something to our community, and we will do everything that we can to ensure that that patch stays intact with its integrity and its foundation for what it means to our communities. Thank you. Patrick?
Thank you. I'm State Representative Patrick Windhorse of the 118th District, which is all or parts of the southernmost 11 counties of our state. I'm a former prosecutor in Massac County, prosecuted cases of all kinds, including arson and aggravated arson. Today I'm here in support of the efforts of my colleagues, Representatives Freeze and Luft, as they work to increase transparency in the hiring in the public safety arena. This specific instance we reference today is a situation that should have never happened. Yes, the governor has a right to pardon anyone or offer anyone clemency, but we've seen a disturbing pattern, particularly with Governor Pritzker, as he has now built a long record of both letting violent and dangerous criminals out of jail early and pardoning or granting clemency to individuals with long records, including serious violent crimes. Throughout this session, I have been highlighting deficiencies in the state's criminal justice reform efforts. The legislation signed by Governor Pritzker last January has arguably made our state less safe, with rising crime leading the headlines on a daily basis. The legislation filed by Representative Freese and sponsored by myself and Representative Luft requires any person applying for a job as a firefighter in a municipal fire department or fire protection district to disclose whether they have been arrested or convicted of arson, and allows the person or board making the hiring decision to consider that applicant's applicable criminal history as part of the process. Arson is a serious crime that carries stiff penalties, especially when there are multiple instances involving aggravating circumstances, as was alleged in the case in the instance we're referencing here today. Local fire departments deserve to know if the person applying to fight fires is actually a person that has been convicted of intentionally starting fires, whether that person has paid their debt to society or not. Requiring applicants to disclose their relevant criminal history as a part of the application process to become a firefighter just makes good old plain common sense. Let us take a step back from allowing and inviting the absurdity we've seen by supporting this legislation that increases transparency and gives local fire departments the tools they need to ensure they are hiring quality individuals to provide critical public services. I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to recognize the urgent need for this legislation to move forward during this committee deadline week. I allow this bill to be assigned and called in committee for a full debate, and ultimately join us in sending House Bill 5693 to the governor's desk. We'll now be happy to take any questions.
In the matter of Mr. Simmons, he did disclose that he had been convicted of arson, and he apparently had presented his petition for clemency as part of his application process. How would this bill address people who are in this particular situation? It's kind of a unique situation.
It is extremely unique, and first of all, the article, and I brought this forth because of the article that I read. Wasn't aware of all the backstory, if he did, disclose that. But in my mind, it absolutely amazes me that somebody can be convicted of arson. I mean, he pled guilty to that charge. And part of it, and Patrick can speak to this, but if you plead guilty, you are admitting that, yeah, I did that. So you plead guilty to arson, and then you become fire chief. Just absolutely floors me that this can happen. Anyway.
I would say the other thing, just a couple points along that line, there's also a question about the clemency process. This individual apparently had some political connections. Was that a part of the decision making that went to the governor decided to grant clemency? Do we know, the PRB's recommendation isn't necessarily public, but the governor could let us know what their recommendation was?
Do you think there should be more transparency in the pardon and clemency process?
Well, from what we've seen in the pardon and clemency process over the last couple years, I believe there should be. I think the public needs to know what is occurring with the PRB. We've had some issues that have been highlighted by not only our caucus, but the Senate Republican caucus about the Prisoner Review Board and the appointments that have been made by the governor and then withdrawn and never actually getting a vote in the Senate for approval. I think the public deserves to know what is going on in that process, especially when we're seeing large numbers of violent criminals being released.
Something I would say on that note too, about the disclosure. The disclosure's fine, and good for him to doing that if he did do that. But does that qualify him for that job? And even if that is the case, what about all the firefighters that work under him? What does that pose for them when they come to work every day and work under a fire chief like that? That would kind of be like, say, a judge having multiple DUIs and being forgiven for that and then sitting on a bench sentencing people for DUIs. It's kind of hypocritical in my mind. So, yes, he may have come forward and may have been pardoned, but just because he came forward certainly doesn't mean that that's the right choice for the job, because you do have to take into consideration, as we all do, we all work under somebody, of who your leader is. So if he did do that, fine, but just because he did that doesn't necessarily mean that he was qualified to do what he's doing, appointed to.
And just real follow-up, so you have 10, 11 people that immediately resigned from this fire department. So what does this do now for that community? That put that community at risk. Say there's a fire, multiple fires now within the DuPont area that this fire department will respond to.
Is there any concern about the level of vetting on the clemency petition, the petitions for clemency? Just to make sure the verity is there for those petitions?
Oh, Patrick.
Well, I think it goes back to your prior point, the prior point we made about more transparency in the process. There is a need for greater transparency, and also comes with that the need to show information that supports those petitions. So information we've heard from some of the clemency petitions was inaccurate, or there were potentially misstatements or potentially false statements made. So there needs to be transparency, so if there are misstatements or false statements, so those can either be corrected or an individual could be held accountable for those statements.
If this doesn't get signed into law, how many convicted arsonists are going to be applying for fire chief positions?
Well, not a fortune teller, obviously don't know that, but it should never happen. And that's the point of this. And again, even if it was previously disclosed, like Representative Luff mentioned, that should immediately disqualify you for this position.
I have another question about just the tying to the governor's office with this decision. Representative Luff specifically, you kind of said the pardon timing was odd. Do you believe that the governor used political relationships to get this guy, to help this guy get a position as the fire chief in a volunteer fire department?
I would assume clout was involved. Sure. And you know, the question on if this wasn't signed into law, that just doesn't affect this situation here. That leaves loopholes in the process for lots of areas, not just with firefighters, but lots of other areas. If something like this comes to the surface and it's not addressed and those holes aren't closed, what message does that send out to other professions, other people in this situation? So it's very important that this bill is supported on both sides of the aisle and immediately signed by the governor, because the ripple effect is not just the fire departments, that profession. This could ripple out to lots of professions out there that could have an effect on a lot of people in this state.
Are there any other questions? Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.